Hello, and thank you for joining me for this presentation, the title of which is The Impact of a Short High School Exchange Program to France on Motivation to Learn French. My name is Olivier Elzingre. I'm a PhD candidate at Monash University in my final year. In this presentation, I discuss the motivational dynamics involved in high school language learners through their engagement in their language classes and during a short exchange in France. The data and analysis presented here form the part of a soon-to-be completed PhD dissertation on the same topic. The background. The rationale for this research project came from the current low representation in research of high school experience either in motivation, in L2 motivation, or in study abroad research. This project reports on 12 teenagers' emergence and development of motivation to study French in high school and in their participation in a 5-week exchange program to France. The project traces critical events leading to their development as French speakers. And in this project, I view L2 motivation through the lens of complex dynamic systems theory, using Dernier's L2 motivational self-system model. Through the main research question, I explore the role of an exchange program to France in secondary school, and I will discuss first why participants decided to go on exchange, and secondly what factors affected participants' motivation while they were abroad. The first question is divided into two parts. The first one focusing on participants' motivation before going abroad, and thus impacted their decision to go abroad. Whereas the second part looks into how the prospect of going on exchange to France influenced their motivation to learn French and engagement in the French classroom. The data was collected, as I said, through 12 high schoolers. They were interviewed numerous times over the course of approximately 1 year, and these students had already decided. They were recruited because they had already decided to go to France on exchange, but had not yet gone. Despite its more common use for learners of English, I used what is currently maybe the most dominant motivational model in research, which is Dernier's L2 motivational self-system. Well, quickly, I faced the theoretical problem that while the context was frequently showing up to be the strongest factor in the motivational system's dynamic, the L2 learning experience remained under-theorized. This question remained an issue that has not yet been resolved, and while I have been convinced by some scholars' suggestions, this is not something I'm going to develop in those slides. Perhaps the most important thing to remember in Dernier's model is the idea that when a language learner identifies a gap between their current level of competence in the language and their ideal state in the language, this leads to motivated behavior. While participants came from 3 distinct education systems, private, religious, and government, their language curriculum were very similar. The main difference were that some in private schools were taught two languages in the first year of high school and could choose between the two the following year. It was still a compulsory subject, however, in their second year. Other than that, one participant in a private school learned French as a compulsory subject until the end of the first semester in year 10, and all others until end of year 9. On the slide you can also see that participants mostly went on exchange at the end of year 10, some end of year 11, and two at the end of year 9. The exchange programs were provided externally through organizations such as Almost French and Youth for Understanding, or through a sister school arrangement. The conditions in the programs were very similar. It involved a host family stay, an attendance to the local school with the exchange partner, a reciprocity in the program, meaning that the French partner would stay in Australia, and a period of time of 5 weeks which covered December and January. The one exchange program that was significantly different to the others was in its duration. One participant went for a full semester. The impact of that program was indeed different to those of the other participants, but the themes explored in these participants' narratives were very much the same as the ones explored in the narratives of the other participants, and therefore I decided to include that data in my thesis and as well in this presentation. One note before I get into the data itself is that this group of participants is not representative of the usual students that we see in our language classes in Melbourne. However, they do represent a profile of students that we wish we had more, which is motivated students, motivated language students. And perhaps something that we can learn from these data and from their narratives is what does a motivated language learner actually look like. And here we have a few illustrations of that. On to the first question, however, now, which is why participants decided to go on exchange to France. And just to remind you that there were two parts to this question. The first one being what was participants' L2 motivation like before deciding to participate in a program, and the second one was how did the prospect of an exchange program to France impact on participants' motivation to learn French, and with a particular focus on the classroom before departure. So, to the first part of the question. The family influence provided participants with an attitude towards language learning. Participants actively encouraged their children to learn a specific language, and among this group, French was evidently highly encouraged. But also one participant who felt motivated to learn French very much because her mother wanted her to learn the other language available at her school, which happened to be the family heritage language, Mandarin. This particular participant stood up to her mother in having the school change her language choice in the first week of her arrival in high school. And this particular student remained highly motivated for the remainder of her high school years learning French. Other family environment influences could be quite personal. For example, one participant in this study discovered quite a lot about fashion and makeup through YouTube videos, and these videos fed her imagination with what the French lifestyle might be like, This particular student went through quite a lot of ups and downs in regards to her classroom engagement. However, she never lost the motivation to learn French itself, and she made that point numerous times during our interviews. Family trips were the most common influence mentioned by participants. Participants shared significant events which they assigned a motivational role in their future language learning in high school. Some of these critical moments, significant events, were very short. For example, one participant talked about seeing his mum speak French on the train and order some food from the trolley. Another participant, however, spent 2 years in France with her family between the ages of 5 and 7, and this of course led to a very significant cultural openness and even identification with French language and culture. These influences, which I labeled attitude, contributed later on to participants' motivation to go on exchange and provided some with an expectation of what they might see there. The school environment also contributed significantly to participants' L2 motivation and motivation to go on exchange. The classroom provided first-hand French learning experience. Participants experienced a sense of competence as language learner and a sense of togetherness with their peers in that environment. They expressed a lot of enjoyment in the classes and engaging in the activity of learning French. The classroom experience contributed to participants' motivation to go abroad as it built on their positive attitude and curiosity towards French language and culture. At the institutional level, Year 9 was for most participants a turning point. It was the year that they faced choosing electives. Languages had to then be explicitly chosen. This brought some autonomy in participants' choice, who faced having to think about the role of French within the ecology of all of their electives. And here, they mentioned choosing French for reasons such as feeling that they had more talent in that particular subject, or for one participant also, choosing French because it was a subject that they knew as opposed to another elective which they did not know the content of. So how did the prospect of an exchange program in France impact on participants' motivation to learn French? Schools promoted exchange programs actively through information sessions, and teachers promised fluency from the experience. Our participants also were able to meet some peers who had returned from an exchange, and these returnees told of their adventures and shared what they had gained over there. Participants with already a strong sense of their learning abilities ended up having visions of themselves traveling to France and developing what Dernier would have called an ideal self. The interesting dimension of this ideal self as a traveling exchange student is that they could see how this vision of themselves in the future would also contribute to their later success in their academic success once they returned to Australia. In the present moment of engagement, however, the knowledge that they were soon to go to France provided participants with motivational buoyancy. Participants expressed new energy in engaging in the French classroom and a renewed confidence in their competence as French learners. Destabilizing elements that had appeared in the transition from compulsory to elective subjects, elective French, and these elements were things like challenging peer behavior, and in Year 9 particularly, and the intensification of the material in Year 10. The idea of going on exchange helped participants focalize their energies in achieving a goal that was closer and more tangible than simply finishing high school successfully. In other words, the exchange program was incredibly motivating. So what were the factors that played a role in participants' motivation to learn French during their stay abroad? In France, adapting to the host family was the highest on participants' priorities. Adapting meant being able to participate and be recognized as a temporary but valuable addition to the host home. This meant necessarily improving communicative skills and involvement in the family activities. This investment in the French context meant a rapid improvement in communicative competence and the emergence of an L2-speaking self. Participants reported all families to be very supportive of their intention to learn French too, policing their own language to facilitate their visitors' integration. So no slang, rules around when English could be used and how to hold oneself during family meals. Feelings of rapid progress and increasing participation in the French context provided a strong motivation in a form of a virtuous cycle. The more participants progressed, the more they engaged, and thus the more they then progressed again. Participants had seen themselves as competent in learning language. And this was further encouragement, of course, but in the case of some who found it more challenging to make progress initially, there were some moments of self-doubt. The exchange context provided participants with what constituted the most significant event in their high school trajectory: a sense of independence and authenticity in the language, a sense of rapid progress, and even integration in the host community. As a future guide, it also helped participants to see how the experience was giving them an advantage in the completion of their studies. All participants expressed a strong interest in future travel. I called it France Plus because whatever travels they mentioned wanting to undertake in the future, they indicated that they would always return to France as part of these future itinerary. In conclusion, in this presentation, I tried to give an overview of the role of a short exchange program by looking at how motivation to go abroad developed and how the program influenced motivation to learn French in class before departure, and what factors influence motivation to learn French while abroad. There are many elements of my participants' narrative that could not be shared in this presentation due to the time allocated. The perspective I developed is a multi-leveled and multi-temporal motivation impact of participants' 5-week exchange. As short as it was in the scheme of the overall high school trajectory, there is strong evidence to suggest that the exchange program is a significant event in the high school years, not only linguistically speaking, but as an experience that would have an impact well beyond the actual time in France. Thank you very much for listening.